Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce, Ukraine War Frontline update, giving you the picture of what's going on the frontline for the 1st of May 2023. ISW, the Institute for the Study of War American military think tank, that has not produced their normal daily report due to the weekend situation, so we got back to one of their briefer reports. But what they do in the absence of updating the individual sectors of the front line is they give some big report on some other subject that they've been developing over the previous however long. So what they do in their sort of, as I normally call their preamble, but this is a big old meaty report on Russian military command. And as I say, ISW is publishing a special edition campaign assessment, and it details the changes in the Russian military command since Russia began its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Basically detailing all the ways that Russia has moved command figures around. I talked about this yesterday and the day before, that this does not support the hypothesis that Russia is doing well in this war. This only supports the hypothesis that Russia are doing badly. That's the only reason you'd have these mass movement of personnel, of command personnel. And anyway, it details this in great detail, quite granular detail. It also talks about how the Russians didn't create an overall theatre commander until quite a way into the war, like at the beginning of the war, first couple of months. There was no overall commander, and that could go some way to explaining why they made such a hash of those initial moves of the initial invasion. There's just no one person coordinating what was going on. It's a bunch of disparate different organizations and sections of the armed forces pulling in different directions, and as a result, it was not an effective invasion. Of course, it wasn't originally an invasion. It really was a special military operation. They just had very poor intel, so they didn't think that there would be any resistance to their sort of movement into Ukraine in order to depose the government. That was a special military operation, part of the whole project. I mean, it was just this, literally was a special military operation until basically the first few minutes of the operation, when they realized, oh damn, this ain't going to work. And they had a whole bunch of military stuck in Ukraine, and they was then suddenly in a war. And it was only then that they realized, okay, this is now war, but we can't say it's a war. We have to still say it's a special military operation. So now, 430 days into this war, that you're still not allowed to call it a war in Russia. So it's obviously ridiculous, but it literally was originally a special military operation. It became a war, and therefore they were totally ill prepared for a war. They hadn't done all of the initial groundwork that you would need to do, or literally quite air work that you need to do, all the planning, all the strategizing for a war. They strategized and planned for a special military operation, and it all went wrong from there. And anyway, this then this was then seen, I guess, in all of the movements, this lack of planning, this lack of setting out what their goals were, and this lack of being able to assess properly what the successes and failures were of their original objectives, or achieving those objectives. That lack of clarity and that bungled planning meant that throughout the entire war, throughout the entire conflict, people have been moved left, right, and center. No one quite knows what they're doing. No one knows quite how to evaluate successes against failures, and you're just seeing people, commanders, generals, colonels, whatever, getting moved left, right, and center as Russia have tried desperately to work out exactly what it is they're trying to achieve. Like, I'm still not really sure what their objectives are at the moment. You've just had an offensive phase where they've achieved nothing. What were they really hoping to achieve? Were they really hoping to take the Donbass? Because let's look at what they've achieved in their offensive phase. So the last 4 months, what have they achieved in the last 4 months? 5 months, 6 months? I mean, really, what they achieved since they lost Kherson and Kharkiv? Well, they've achieved taking some small amount of territory near Bakhmut. They've just taken a couple of roads in Marinka, and a couple of bits of a few fields up and down, and maybe some villages up and down in the Kreminna area. Well done. So then, if you're Putin trying to assess, okay, how have we done, what needs to happen, then goodness me, I don't know. You'd be sacking all your generals, and this is partly what the Institute for the Study of War is having a look at, that kind of movement of those commanders and the sacking, moving left, right, down of the people who are decision makers. And again, what does that reflect? Okay, as we go into the front line, and we'll start in the northeast sector, Kupiansk-Kreminna. On my map, that looks a little bit like this. Not a lot has happened. And in the absence of an ISW, this is basically the entirety of the ISW frontline assessment. In the absence of their detailed report, it might be worth looking at the live UA map. Just in case you haven't seen the live UA map, it's the General Staff's map. This is the Ukrainian map that people like ISW draw quite heavily on, because these are the claims of the General Staff of Ukraine. And what they say here is that if you look at the whole front line, it gives you an idea of where they think the front lines are and also what's happening along the front line. So these represent shellings, that kind of activity. And you can see there's no, unfortunately, it really zooms in very quickly. There's no activity on the ground, no military skirmishes, etc., etc. It's horrible. It's a horrible map. That's why I don't use it, because it does that. There's no territorial exchanges. There's only ground military activity in Bakhmut, Adivka, and indeed down in Marinka. As you can see, everywhere else is merely shelling. I'd say merely shelling. Shelling's terrible. And even down in the Kherson region, you can see there's a lack of that compared to what there would have been months ago. Exchanges across Zaporizhia, exchanges around Vuhledar, and shelling right up and down the front line. Not massive amounts of it. Things are really calming down, and we've seen a reflection of that in the daily losses reported by the General Staff that I give to you in the morning. 450 Russian soldiers were liquidated. That is on the very much the lower end of the scale. Okay, so essentially we can almost go straight down to Bakhmut. The General Staff say that Russia did not conduct offensive operations along the Kupiansk-Kreminna line, that they have been conducting fewer assaults in the Kupiansk and Liman directions than in Bakhmut and Marinka. They are using more artillery, though, I suppose in relation or relatively compared to actual attacks and assaults. Russian forces conducted ground attacks in and around Bakhmut and along the Adivka-Donetsk city line. Yesterday, Ukrainian Eastern Grouping of Forces spokesperson reported that Ukrainian forces continue to have access to logistics routes to Bakhmut. Okay, so let's have a look at a couple of other maps. We'll go to Vuhledar. This is the French mapper that has no activity in the Kupiansk to Svatova area. And then as we come further down to Kreminna, there is still continued pushing of the Russians around Bilohorivka, and the Ukrainian pushing around there, Russians pushing back, and Russians pushing on in the forest area, Serebryanska forest south of Kreminna. So on my map, that looks like not a lot of activity. Get down to the forest area, possibly some activity in the forest, although the General Staff aren't particularly reporting that, and activity around Bilohorivka, although the General Staff aren't reporting that. So that could be Vuhledar just giving an indication what's happened over the last week as opposed to actually yesterday. And really, most of the activity appears to be happening in Bakhmut. If we come down into Bakhmut, we can see on my map that the yellow lines are somewhat different, north and south of Bakhmut to the red lines. The yellow lines are a deep state map, pro-Ukrainian mapper. Russian mapper, pro-Russian mapper is the Syriac maps, who have indicated that the Russians have made some territorial advances both in the north of Bakhmut and in the southeast of Bakhmut, on from, I think this is the industrial college there. And the deep state map has the Ukrainians having control still in those areas. It could be that there is a delay on updating the map. I don't know. They've updated the map in the Adivka area, so I guess this is just a bit of a difference of opinion between the two. I've left the blue lines to show you where the lines were yesterday. So yesterday, the Russians hadn't advanced this far, and this area there was in Ukrainian control. And today, as you can see, as according to Syriac maps, they have advanced much further to the west. Now, as I keep saying, it looks like the days are numbered for continued defense of Bakhmut, because look at this. The Ukrainians only control a very small amount of Bakhmut, less than 10% on most evaluations. The question, as I keep saying, the question is, will the Ukrainians pull something out of the bag now? They have till the 9th of May. 9th of May is a hugely symbolic day, victory day for the Russians. If they have full control over Bakhmut by 9th of May, they will shout about it to the rafters. So the Ukrainians, some are expecting them to do something surprising, maybe a counterattack, bring something else to bear in the area, some kind of weapon that they haven't so far used, or I don't know. There are lots of different theories kicking around. Or do they simply allow Bakhmut to be gradually taken, and then at the end of it say, yeah, okay, well done, you've taken Bakhmut, but you've lost X many. So Prigozhin admitted that they took 230 meters yesterday, the Wagner, at the cost of 100 Wagner lives, or 99 lives. I presume that's dead. It might just be casualties, but either way, what he's saying is, we are taking massive casualties. This is really expensive. This is attritional, which is exactly what the Ukrainians have been saying. So this is confirming the Ukrainian claims and confirming the claims I've been making, which means it's been worthwhile for the Ukrainians to maintain defense in Bakhmut. Prigozhin is saying that. The question is he saying that because it's true, or is he saying it to amplify this attritional nature so that he gets the Russian MOD to give him more artillery, to allow him to recruit in prisons, etc., etc., etc. So, one must question what the motivations are for why he's saying what he is saying. Okay, if we go to War Map says that pretty much agrees with most of the lines there. I would say that the Russians are definitely in control of the entirety of the railway line here, so that War Mapper still has the Ukrainians potentially holding on somewhat in this northeasterly area, but you can see that actually the net is closing. War Mapper are somewhat more generous to Ukrainians. I would say it looks more like that than what they have indicated there. Poulet-Volant, looking at the Bakhmut map, they still have actually some gains for the Ukrainians in the north. I don't have any details of that, but we know that they are still trying to push the Russians back in the Kreminna area to allow this road to still be used if necessary. I don't think it is being used at the moment. It's too dangerous. But I get a feeling that the southern one going through Ivanivska, the T0504 highway, is being used. But you do have to, I've seen some footage of vehicles moving pretty damn quickly along that road. And then obviously pressure right the way in here. And you can see that there's a smaller and smaller area of Ukrainian control as the days go by. Syriac maps. Oops, sorry, I've got the wrong one on. That's Marinka. We're going to come to that. So what we have for yesterday, Syriac maps has it here. The current situation in Bakhmut, Russians took control over the first buildings on the other side of Tchaikovsky Avenue. Meanwhile, heavy clashes with the Ukrainian army are taking place along Levenevskoho Street. So they have taken a small amount of land here. Because bear in mind, I didn't do my frontline map yesterday. So this area in the north could be from the last 48 hours. What Syriac Maps is saying is this portion here is definitely taken yesterday, and that's what they're referring to with that gained territory indication there, and fierce fighting going on in the north. And that's all they have to say about Bakhmut. The only other thing to mention about Bakhmut, I've been talking a lot about snipers recently and how the Ukrainians are using snipers really effectively, and they are loading a load of snipers into the Bakhmut and surrounding areas. That's not to say Russians aren't as well. In fact, Rob Lee, who's always worth following on Twitter, has over time been giving updates on the sniper equipment that he has seen the Russians using in and around Bakhmut, usually Wagner examples, and this is going back to March the 16th. And we've got lots of tweets from him, and most recently yesterday saying, well, they're using this type of, I mean, I don't know what an Orsis T5000 sniper rifle is, but he's obviously, knows this kind of stuff and is talking about how Wagner and the Russian snipers are using these different rifles. Anti-materiel rifles are ones that can punch you through armor and take out bits of equipment, as opposed to anti-personnel sort of rifles. So the Russians are using snipers effectively. One would assume they're using them effectively in the Bakhmut area as well. And that is Bakhmut. It is slowly being constricted, and the question still remains: what do Ukraine do next in that sector? Kenneth Gregg, the Swedish fighter has been around Bakhmut. Don't know where he is exactly at the moment. He obviously has contacts around there. Says about Bakhmut: Bakhmut is unchanged. Street fighting in the western part. Street fighting in the western part and repelled attacks at Kreminna. Notably, their effectiveness is declining, a small but important development. If we can hold out until the 9th of May, there will be consequences for the Russian domestic politics, and that is, of course, super important. And just to let you know that I've not seen any Telegram reports by Reba, any Twitter or Telegram reports by Reba, the pro-Russian source, since the 28th. So as that is the case, we will move on to Adivka on my map. That is coming out of there, coming down, and this is the situation in Adivka. What I have done is update my Ukrainian maps, pro-Ukrainian mapper, deep state map here. It's a little bit time consuming, but I have done it. This is to show you the difference between the Russian and Ukrainian mappers. I had done that in the south. It's remained unchanged here in the Vodyany or Pitny area. I did hear claims about the fierce fighting in the Vodyany area, that I think did the Russians attack and some 60% of their attack was taken out or something like that. I did report that yesterday. My memory fails me though. But there's been reports about activity in the Kupiansk-Kreminna area. In fact, if we go to Kenneth Gregg, he reported this yesterday and then talked about it again today. So his Adivka claims are: at Adivka, we continue to advance against the Russians' reserves in Kupiansk with success. More on this tomorrow when the details can be released. So the Kupiansk, and he said something about it yesterday, is this area. Now, if we just go from top to bottom here, there is a difference between the mappers in the railway area between Novobakhmutivka and Krasnohorivka. Deep State map has the Russians further back from the railway line than Syriac maps has. And then a slight difference around Krasnohorivka. There was always a difference here, although Deep State map were one of the first mappers to suggest that the Russians had taken control of Krasnohorivka. Since then, Syriac maps have said that the Russians were much further to the west, and indeed at some point in Stepova. I don't know whether that was ever the case, but they've now redressed that claim to show that the Russians are much further back from the railway line. Whether that's their mapping changed and they rejigged the map, or whether the Ukrainians actually did a counterattack in the Stepova area, I'm not sure. And then I find this interesting. So Kamyanka is a place that has held out by all accounts, and this was another settlement that the Russians did claim at different stages to have taken control of, but it didn't appear to be the case. Well, now Syriac maps has that under control of the Russians. Deep State map doesn't. So there is a difference there. Do the Russians control Kamyanka? And that would be important because obviously it allows them to get closer to this reservoir here, and then closer to being able to properly encircle Adivka as a whole. It'll be interesting to see what the actual reality is of that. There's another kind of settlement here. I don't know what it's called, but it appears on Syriac maps that the Russians control that, whereas Deep State map, that's not the case. And then we get down to this Kupiansk area where the Ukrainians have apparently pushed the Russians back. So we shall see over the coming days what Kenneth Gregg and other sources have to say about that. When we look at ISW, they don't say much about Adivka other than what I've already said. Russian forces conducted ground attacks in and around Bakhmut and Adivka Donetsk. So that's it, conducted ground attacks there. Okay. real lack of detail. That's not to say that things haven't happened, but it's Monday after Sunday. It's quite often the case that a lot of sources aren't particularly active on a Sunday, so we don't get to hear about what has happened in any explicit detail. So we can come down further down from Adivka, knowing that there has been activity there, to Marinka. Now, here we might have had some kind of breakthrough. The Russians might have had a breakthrough. If we go to Syriac maps, here it says situation west of Donetsk city during the last 48 hours. Russian army and DPR forces have taken full control over Druzhby Avenue in the center of Marinka after the Ukrainian army withdrawal. About 75% of the town is now under Russian control. This is fairly significant. There has been this long, protracted battle over Marinka, and for some months now, this Druzhby Avenue that kind of cuts the center of Marinka is not like a geographical center. There's a lot more Marinka to the east than there is to the west, but this main avenue has been the front line effectively that separates the two sides, and the Russians have been able to advance to the south in this industrial area and advance to the north, looking to advance past the northern shores of this reservoir here, this fishing pond as it says, but they've been kept back, the Russians here at Druzhby Avenue. Well, it looks like they have now taken control of Druzhby Avenue and have moved west into these blocks. Now, if you remember from months ago, Rebar was saying there's fighting on the western outskirts of Marinka, and it was never the case. But we are starting to move to a position potentially where the Russians might be fighting over the western suburbs of Marinka. This has all been reduced to rubble. This has a very little intrinsic value, rather like Bakhmut, because all of this is now interdicted to some degree. All these kind of communication lines, but this is rather like Bakhmut. You can't begin to think about taking places further behind here if you don't take Marinka. So Krasnohorivka is quite an important place, and then you have Kurakova, which is supposedly an important place as well. For I think there's quite a lot of reinforcements position there for different areas, and the Russians would obviously like to take all of this because they have intentions on the whole of Donbass, and they can't do that without taking Marinka, but Marinka holds, so as long as that holds, they can't move forward, so they do need to take Marinka, and it has that kind of extrinsic value. So that's what's been happening there. We move on down to Vuhledar. In the we have general staff reports of, that's that map again, lovely. The Marinka claims here, Russian forces conducting offensive operations, Liman, Bakhmut, Adivka, Marinka directions. They're all very general claims. Doesn't really talk about any sort of territorial exchanges. And then Vuhledar, we can see here that, I hate this map, that's why I don't use it, as I have said. There has been activity down here in Vuhledar over the last few days, to the point where there are some mapping changes that I've made. So this is my map, and here to the south of Vuhledar you have Pavlivka and Mikhailska. Pro-Russian mapper Syriac Maps has the Russians in this Dacha area to some degree, but actually Syriac Maps has them pushed further back than Deep State Map is to the south of Pavlivka, to the southwest. Now this is interesting because it appears that the Ukrainians have been able to flank the Russians to some degree in this Pavlivka direction and have taken territory to the south. This territory here, kind of in a crescent, has been taken back by the Ukrainians, and that's according to Syriac Maps as well as Deep State Map. But Syriac Maps, as I say, gives the Ukrainians more success in this area than Deep State Map. So that is a significant change in the mapping, and I don't know what that means going forward. If the Russians are really intent on taking Vuhledar and are trying to pound it from the air and from ground assaults and do all they're doing there, and what does it mean if the Ukrainians are successfully getting behind them back here? Will this mean that they will now have to redivert their attentions to this southern area, and that will give Vuhledar a bit of breathing space? Then they can maybe form a counterattack to push back the Russians north of Mikhailska. I don't know. I mean, I think it's interesting that we're starting to see some gains for the Ukrainians in that area. But no particular explicit information about that in the sources, because as I said, these are Sunday sources. But I will continue to read what the ISW has said. A Russian source suggested on April the 30th that Russian forces will likely conduct their own offensive in southern Ukraine if the potential Ukrainian counteroffensive fails. The Russian source cited the fact that top Russian officials and law enforcement are discussing possible candidates to lead various districts in Zaporizhia Oblast, which are currently under Ukrainian control, as further evidence of Russian plans to move in a southern direction. Doesn't, of course, mean that they're able to do that. That you can talk, I can plan to live on the moon next year. Am I likely to do that? No, I've got no chance of getting to the moon. So, do the Russians really have a realistic chance of executing a successful counterattack in the Zaporizhia Oblast area? No, not in my opinion, not with the capacity that they have and not with the capability that they have. Ukrainian main military intelligence, the GUR head, Budanov, has reported that Russia is seeking to take control of numerous Russian paramilitary groups, and is trying to create a new structure that would subordinate PMCs, private military companies, to the Russian general staff. This is, again, what does this tell us? It tells us that Russia can't get a big enough, decent enough conventional army to do the job it wants to do. It has to get a load of people from prisons. You don't really want to put these convicts into the conventional army, so you whack them into private military companies, mercenaries, and then you make them subordinate to you create a system. This is what Budanov is saying, that they're creating a more formal system where these private military companies are answerable to the Russian conventional forces, and it's just a bit of a mess. That would be my opinion. It's another indication that things are not looking good for the Russians if they are so desperate that they are having to comb the prisons for more convicts. A Russian military blogger claimed that Russia is forming new brigades of the airborne forces, VDV, elite units that have conducted joint operations with Wagner forces in Bakhmut. But again, you take the VDV from your cream of the crop in terms of your conventional forces. So you have your infantry brigades or whatever, and you say, oh, well done, you guys are really good. You know, Ivan, Igor, and Vlad, you guys are great soldiers. We're going to take you to be in the VDV. I don't think it's going to look anything like that, because these guys have been decimated. The VDV have been decimated. They're just taking anyone they can get, it appears, into the VDV. Like the 155th has been Naval Infantry Brigade has been reconstituted anywhere between 3 and 8 times, I think it is. And their force quality over this period or successive periods of reconstitution is so poor now that you're thinking, well, if you're going to make new VDV groups, then who's comprising them? Are they elite troops, or are they just anyone that you can get to whack into a unit and you call them VDV? But does it mean that they're elite? No, not really. So yeah, it's just a label as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, there you go. So that's what's going on the front line. It's a bit of an all over the place report because my brain is like mush today. Sorry about that. Not anything that I've heard coming out of Dnieper River area, Kherson, Zaporizhia, Crimea. Nothing else to say really. Relatively quiet day, and I think we're going to see relatively quiet days until the Ukrainians mount their counterattack in proper. So anyway, thank you so much. I just want to say thank you to Boz, who on a live stream interview with Anna that I did. Please check my lives out below. Check that interview out. It's fabulous. Thank you for the super chat you gave, and Sub Hero as well yesterday. I missed that you gave a super chat and donated to the channel, so I'm really thankful to him. He's already a member, so thank you so much for that. I just missed that. Sorry for being rude. Anyway, thank you for all your support. Really is appreciated. Take care, and I will speak to you later.